Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and welcome to Prawn News. And we're kicking off with the news that Gigabyte's latest motherboards will use AI, surprise, surprise, to improve the performance of AMD's Ryzen CPUs by up to 25%. So this is a new X3D Turbo Mode 2.0, which analyzes what the chip's doing, adjusts its frequency and power and other things to then improve performance by up to 25%, which is nice in theory, but it only works with 3 motherboards apparently at the moment: the Aorus Elite X3D Ice, the Master Ice, and the Pro Ice. I'll leave links to all the stories in the description so you can find out more and see those specific motherboards. But that means that if you've got one of those and obviously a high-end X3D CPU from AMD, you should be able to fairly easily use artificial intelligence to improve the performance of it. How well it works, I don't know. There is some evidence to suggest it improved Cyberpunk performance, for example, by 15%. So there is potential for that to work in a number of games. And there's some other highlights to it as well, like support for faster RAM up to 9,000 mega transfers per second, for example. So that's pretty awesome as well. So a nice update from Gigabyte. It's just a shame it's limited to just those 3 motherboards at the moment. For Team Blue, there's pretty interesting news because Nvidia has invested $5 billion into Intel. Now, Intel's been obviously having trouble lately, and this is a massive investment from what is essentially a competitor, because Nvidia is basically a competitor in the commercial space, at least in terms of chip development. Now, Intel's been struggling with that AI side of things, really missed the boat on that, and they've acknowledged that they fell behind there, and that's one of the reasons that the company's not been doing as well as it could have done and has been struggling lately. So this massive investment from Nvidia could be a real boost, could also be interesting in a number of ways, because obviously they are competitors in some ways. Intel's just gone into the GPU market just in the last few years, which is obviously a competition with Nvidia. And both companies want to do AI stuff, and Nvidia's been just doing boon in the AI area. So obviously this is pretty interesting, but they are both US companies essentially supporting each other at a time when the US is pushing towards very internal growth of companies. In the meantime, Nvidia has ended support for its 50 series GPUs, or at least some of them. So Tom's Hardware has noted that on the Nvidia website, you can no longer get Founders Edition cards with the exception of the 5070. Now, this apparently suggests that this might be in preparation for the super launch, so the refresh that comes every now and then to Nvidia's cards, where they basically launch improved models with the super branding, which potentially means that maybe we'll be seeing more Nvidia GPUs very soon. This is just rumors, but it is fairly logical that it might well happen. So watch out for that. If you've been holding out on an Nvidia GPU, it might be prudent to wait a little while and see what happens. Epic Games has announced that Fortnite will soon let you pay your exact amount for items rather than having to buy a bundle of V-Bucks. So this means if you want something specific from the store, you can just put the amount of money in that you want for that specific item rather than having to pay like 1,000 V-Bucks or 2,800 V-Bucks, for example. So you no longer have to buy bundles of it, which is pretty good. Now, as a parent of a child that often wants to have stuff from the Fortnite store, this is good because obviously it means you don't have to put quite so much money in every time. Not that I buy everything for them because they have to learn the value of money, but when they're nagging at you to have this thing and you end up thinking, oh, I don't want to pay another 1,000 V-Bucks, pay the bundle for that, being able to buy specific things is pretty good. This is coming to every version of Fortnite on all the different consoles with the exception of PlayStation for some reason. That might be a work in progress. But you still will have some benefits to buying the bundles of V-Bucks, so you'll still get a bonus amount and things like that. So it'll still be worth buying in some instances if you wanted to get a bunch of V-Bucks rather than buying specific products. Valve has apparently invited a bunch of VR influencers to a secret event in Seattle, and this is suggested it might mean that the Steam Frame is coming. There was a trademark recently submitted for Steam Frame, which is suggested to be the next Steam VR headset. after the Valve Index, and that it's basically going to be a reveal of that now. The people that are there obviously haven't shared anything yet because the news hasn't come out at this point at the time of making this video on what they've actually seen, but that's not a surprise because something would have been revealed. An embargo date might have been set for it. So we might hear some news about a new VR headset from Steam soon. And this is potentially good news because the Valve Index got great reviews. People loved it. They thought it was great. And Steam does have a habit of making good hardware. Just look at the Steam Deck, for example. There's a pretty bonkers lawsuit that's just been settled, and it's a class action lawsuit against Corsair, and it's over RAM. So this is all to do with the labeling of DDR4 and DDR5 RAM. The claim is that between a number of years, Corsair was essentially selling kits of DDR4 and DDR5 RAM, claiming fast speeds on them, so the speed that you could get from the RAM, but not saying up to in there. And this is basically because the RAM used XMP, so you have to go into the BIOS settings and turn XMP on to get to those speeds, but that isn't clear to everybody. And it's not always possible. You have to have a motherboard that's capable of it, and you have to meet the QVL standards, so the RAM has to be compatible with your motherboard. Various other things need to be required, and obviously be savvy enough to go into the BIOS and turn it on in the first place. So essentially, it was misleading languaging on the packaging. It's not necessarily the case that Corsair was intentionally trying to mislead people, but the labeling was deemed to not be clear enough, and as a result, Corsair's got to pay out $5.5 million for this class action lawsuit in California, and there's potential for people to claim money for that if they bought a kit between 2018 and 2025. This is fairly bonkers. Jay's 2 cents did a video on it, exploring and showing basically how loads of other manufacturers like Crucial and other companies also sold RAM with that same sort of label on it, saying the maximum speed, but without saying that it has to be up to, or that that's the maximum you could get, but you have to do some other things first. So it sets a worrying precedent for companies, for sure. It makes some sense from the layperson's perspective if you think about it. If you're not tech savvy, go to buy RAM, just put it in your PC and expect that it'll work properly. And that BIOS requirement to have to turn it on is very archaic and kind of niche and not very fair on less tech-savvy people, frankly. But I don't think that's Corsair's fault, necessarily. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. But this is pretty crazy. It'll be interesting to see if more of these suits come out in the future. Another thing that's pretty crazy is the Escape from Tarkov community is up in arms because the game is finally coming to Steam. So it's being launched in a 1.0 release. It's got its own Steam page, so now you can get it on Steam. People that own the game are apparently complaining because they have to buy it again on Steam in order to have it on Steam. Now, I have bought Escape from Tarkov on the Battlestate launcher, and I played it a lot. But the idea of buying it again doesn't seem mad to me. I think it's pretty crazy to expect to get it for free on that platform, even if you have bought it before. I bought games on Epic or on Ubisoft's software, and then bought it again on Steam, and not thought that I'd get it for free, for sure. I personally love having games on the Steam platform, because it's where I remember my games are. There's so many other launches. Sometimes I forget what games I've got if they're not on Steam. So I'm happy to rebuy the game and have it again on Steam. I wouldn't even think that you'd get that for free and just be able to launch it from there. You do apparently have to still have a Battlestate account even if you get it on Steam and launch it from there. So maybe that's people's annoyance of that, is that, look, I've connected it, so surely it should work it out. But the admin that will be required to work out people's accounts and see that they've got a Battlestate account and then go, okay, you can have the game for free, will be so much work for Battlestate. You can see why they wouldn't want to do it. So I think it's pretty nuts to even think that's a thing. But loads of people are apparently raging about it. So talking of crazy things, Corsair has launched a 3,000 watt power supply unit that costs just under $600, and it's got 4 native 12 volt 2x6 power connectors for graphics cards. So if you've got a GPU that requires that, so an Nvidia GPU with the 12 volt 2x6 connector required on it, and you can use this to power it. Now, obviously, this is a beast of a power supply, the largest, most powerful power supply in terms of wattage that Corsair's released. It's actually not that huge, apparently, in actual dimensions. It's a reasonably sized power supply, but it's obviously chucking out a ridiculous amount of power. This is not intended for your average gamer or consumer. Obviously, it's for uses where people are going to be using multiple GPUs, most likely probably in AI situations and things like that, where a lot of juice is required for that sort of thing. But it is crazy to see. It's a lot of money, but you are getting a lot of wattage for that. It also comes with a 10-year warranty. So nice, solid support from Corsair as always. So ChatGPT is developing an age verification system to help identify people under 18 years old. The reason for this is actually down to a legal action that was taken by a family of a 16-year-old boy who committed suicide after having conversations with a chatbot, basically trying to work out the best ways to end his life and how to write a letter to his parents and things like that. Tragic, horrific, and as a parent, it's just saddening. I don't even want to think about it, but it's an awful thing, and obviously everybody thinks it's awful. And OpenAI is basically now doing more to try and protect minors and help ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen in future. So they'll be trying to work out ways to get people to prove their ID and verify. And in certain countries, that will include obviously uploading potential documents to prove your age. And obviously they're aware that this is a privacy concern for many people, but also it's important because protecting and safeguarding minors is a very important part of it, especially if something like this is going to happen. It's also going to make some changes so that people under 18 won't be able to engage in flirtatious talk with ChatGPT, and also won't be able to talk about things like how to kill yourself and other instructions for that. For adults, it'll be slightly different. Obviously, the important part here is looking after minors, and that's not a bad thing, although obviously yet another reason for British people to have to upload their ID to websites and prove that they're adults is not good. But there are many different issues with AI, what with the stories of it causing psychoses recently, and then obviously things like this with young people engaging with it in bad ways and getting hurt as a result. Meanwhile, China has banned Nvidia AI chips. So the country has now regulated, so telling companies like ByteDance and AliExpress and Alibaba basically to stop buying Nvidia chips and stop testing with them and stop using them. And also ruled recently that Nvidia was basically having a monopoly, and that the US-based semiconductor company had violated the country's anti-monopoly laws as well. So obviously this is part of the ongoing fight between the US and China, but also China is trying to do its own thing and to do better in that space. And so this is an interesting update to this. It'll be interesting to see what the impact is, because obviously Chinese companies were buying a lot of Nvidia GPUs up, and GPUs were specifically designed for China by Nvidia with that D variant. So now things are going to change even more moving forward. Talking about change, apparently the price of both SSDs and hard disk drives is likely to go up and inflate. And again, this is also down to basically more storage being required for AI data centers and an increased demand there for those. And as a result, there's going to be a price hike of NAND prices, which will impact storage. And so SanDisk and Micron and Western Digital have all suggested that there'll be increases in the pricing and could surge as much by 30% up. So if you're looking for NVMe SSD or just SSD storage, you might want to buy as soon as possible, because prices is probably going to skyrocket, and that's obviously going to be painful. I've seen screens on a lot of different things, but this is one of the most ridiculous things. And this article on PC Gamer is fantastic because it highlights just how ridiculous this is. But V-Color is releasing some RAM, the Xfinity Plus DDR5 RAM modules, which have a little display on them, so you can see the performance of the RAM by looking at the RAM in your machine. This is kind of ridiculous in a number of ways, and is highlighted incredibly by their own promotional imagery, which shows the RAM installed on the motherboard. But one thing PC Gamer points out is the fact that the 24-pin power cable is missing from the motherboard. It's been edited out of the picture because otherwise that cable was probably blocking the display. Also, like, I don't know how you sit with your PC, but if I had that on mine, I would barely be able to see it anyway, even if the 24-pin cable wasn't in the way, because it's on the edge and it's facing away. So it's really going to depend how you've got your PC on your desk or where it is. But it seems that brands are wanting you to put more and more screens on your system. Obviously, people like screens. I indeed have one on my Kraken cooler, which shows the GPU and CPU temperatures. I don't know if I need to see the performance of my RAM on the fly, and it will be a struggle with this anyway. So this might be one of those just thoroughly ridiculous things that nobody needs. Anyway, that's all the stories for this week. Hope you found them interesting. Check out the links in the description to read the full articles. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great weekend.